will just require a little bit of explanation. There was an incident last week, which the Minister is aware of, at a community childcare centre in my electorate, the Campbelltown Community Children's Centre, which is relevant to the department because it sits, the department is the landlord. It is adjacent to the Campbelltown preschool, which is within the remit of the various maintenance responsibilities of the department, which are identified in this investing expenditure or possibly the next page. The nature of the incident, for the record, was an intruder jumped a fence where the children were playing in the playground. The director kept him busy while the staff moved the children inside the centre, as I understand it. I've had very strong feedback from families that the staff, Charmaine Leonard, the director, and her team did an excellent job, and so we obviously extend our thanks to them for the situation. The intruder left the centre without causing any direct damage, as I understand it, other than the shock and fear of the incident, and was arrested soon after. I understand police attended very quickly and were able to arrest him. So that side of the situation was dealt with appropriately, as far as I can tell, by staff and by police, and the Education Standards Board were notified, and I thank the Minister's Office for engaging with me on that. The issue that has arisen since is that the fence that the intruder jumped over has been raised as an issue of concern by the centre with the department and the ESB, and again since with the department as the landlord. The fence was obviously capable of being jumped over by the intruder, and the centre are seeking support from the department in having an improved fence line. I understand the department's considering it. I asked the Minister if he will seek a briefing from the department on the matter and give favourable consideration to the support required to improve that fence line.
Okay. Just before you answer, Minister, I'll allow this question to go ahead, but I just warn the member from Moriarty he's strained from the examination of the financial budget in that line of questioning. But I'll allow this question to go ahead. I just ask him that future questions be more closely aligned to the budget itself. Minister.
Thank you, Chair, and I thank the member for Moriarty for his question. These are really serious events, and of course they cause a great deal of distress for staff, for the children at the centre, and for their families as well. And I accept the member's point around it, although it was not a DFE site, that we are opposite and are landlords, and the responsibility of the fence may well sit with us. I will seek a briefing from the department around what is planned regarding that fence, and when I'm in a position to report back to the member for Morialta, I will do so, but I thank him for bringing that to my attention.
Thank you. And my next question goes to a budget line that may help. It probably is not directly relevant, but it might help. Page 174, this is related to the 3-year-old preschool project, Early Childhood Education and Care. There's $9.4 million budgeted for projects to be completed by December 2026. Is the Minister able to identify the preschools and early learning services that will receive those infrastructure upgrades and the funding amounts and purposes for each of them?
I'll hand over to Kim Little, the Chief Executive of the OECD, to provide an answer on that question.
For you, Minister. Thank you to the member for the question. There is going to be some infrastructure expenditure over the next period. It's across a range of different projects. They'll include projects to stand up the first 2 demo hubs. So the specific side of one of them has already been announced, which is in Port Pirie. There'll be some minor capital works involved in that. There'll also, as government has announced, be 3 metro preschools which are being stood up as demonstration sites for the universal rollout of 3-year-old preschool, which may require some works. There'll be a particular focus on the government preschools which are coming into the rollout in 2026, and I'm happy to say more about that rollout. In 2026, as they may need some minor works at least to ensure that they're appropriate for higher volumes of 3-year-old children. So there's a range of different projects which are focused on ensuring that we're in a good position for the 2026 year.
Thank you. Go to budget paper 5, page 19. The budget line is relating to the broader $715 million program of over the forward estimates for the 3-year-old preschool rollout. I have a series of questions along this page. It's a long page and fairly detailed, so I'll go for the questions, but happy to bring them back to the page if required. But it's page 19 of budget paper 5. Minister, the page here, I realise this is something spoken of before, but in the context of the series of questions to come, I suspect it's worth refreshing people's memories. The page identifies reforms taking place until 2032. The first dot point talks about the rollout of universal 3-year-old preschool between 2026 and 2032. I highlight that there was government's election commitment that there would be universal 3-year-old preschool from 2026, and would seek the Minister's clarification of what the government's view is on the timing, which I certainly consider to be a 6-year delay in the promise that was given to people before the election. And can the Minister justify how the government would consider this election promise to be fulfilled when it will be an electoral cycle and a half after the original commitment date before it is fully rolled out?
Thank you, Member from Morialta, and we're obviously not going to agree on that point. I think the actual policy document or brochure, or call it what you will, that spoke specifically around this government then opposition's commitment to universal 3-year-old preschool, spoke about it commencing in 2026, and that is exactly what we are delivering. The planned rollout between 2026 and 2032, which you correctly referred to in your question, is without a doubt the quickest and most ambitious rollout anywhere in the country for 3-year-old preschool. And we are committed to delivering that. The reason that we believe we can roll it out starting from 2026 to full completion by 2032 is in no small way due to the recommendation by the Honourable Julia Gillard in her Royal Commission report, which recommended the mixed model of delivery, which of course is sharing responsibility between the government sector and private providers in the long day care sector, and utilising their capacity in that mixed model. That is one of the key reasons, in fact, that the Honourable Julia Gillard recommended the mixed model, and as she put it to me, it was the best way of reaching the maximum number of 3-year-olds as possible, and the fastest way of doing it, and the best way of being able to recruit the staff we need to do so. So I am firmly of the position, as is the Premier, that what we are delivering is in line with the election commitment that we made. We've made a lot of progress in a relatively short period of time. Having Kim Little and her team on board, the Office of Early Childhood Development established, some very significant budget commitments made in this most recent budget, which will enable us to bring to life the commitment, and a huge amount of work and modelling done by Kim and her team on how the rollout will occur, its sequencing, and also our workforce strategy and the things that we need to do to make sure we meet the clear targets that we have in terms of the workforce that we need to deliver it.
How many 3-year-olds are in preschool today? As in not today, but are enrolled in preschool now?
So,
You said it's roughly 700. Approximately 700.
And thank you, Minister. When did those students, I think comprising of Aboriginal students and students under guardianship, when did those students become eligible to attend public preschools? At the age of 3.
I'll take that on notice, but what I can say is I've been informed that it has been delivery of 12 hours to Aboriginal children and children under guardianship, but as of this year that has increased to 15 hours. But I'll take your question around when their eligibility commenced on notice.
Thank you. So for some years, obviously, we've had students, 3-year-olds, getting 12 hours if they're Aboriginal students or children under guardianship. This year it's come to 15 hours, and in 2026 is what I would characterise as the next expansion of 3-year-olds having some sort of preschool service. Can the Minister identify for those students that will be having the opportunity to have a preschool a service of some sort in 2026, how many will there be in public preschools and how many will there be in the long daycare services under the mixed model that has been described?
Thank you, Member for Murray-Alta. I'll pass over to Kim Little to provide you an answer on that question.
Through you, Minister. Thank you very much for the question from the member. So in the first year of the rollout, I'll take you to the rollout schedule, which has recently been released as part of the budget announcements. So in 2026, the plan for the rollout is twofold. We'll be turning on government preschools in some rural and remote areas. That's around 40 services that we expect to come on board. Obviously, that will be comparatively small numbers of children through those services as they are rural and remote services, so somewhere in the range of 100 to 200 children, noting, of course, that 3-year-old preschool is a non-compulsory service, and we'll be looking to engage very closely with families in those communities to promote the benefits of their children receiving 2 years of preschool. I'll note as context that thus far, if the rollout were only focusing on that geographical element, it would be very similar to the Victorian rollout, and we would have similar numbers of children coming in that first year, adjusted for the South Australian population relative to the Victorian population. However, the innovation that Ms Gillard recommended, and that has been embedded into the logic of the rollout, is that in addition to that geographical rollout, with government preschools, which will be staged, starting with remote and rural communities and building over the life of the reform, we're also engaging very closely with long daycare providers who have latent capacity within their services as they currently exist, and that was identified through some empirical work done by the Royal Commission. So we're going to be working very closely with them over the second half of this year and into the first half of next year to see how many of those long daycare services can stand up a 3-year-old preschool offer that will meet our requirements for 2026. So while it's not possible to estimate in advance exactly how many children will be able to attend that offer through the long daycare space, we would anticipate that collectively, rather than being in the order of hundreds of children, which was the case in the first year of the rollout in Victoria, we'd be in the order of thousands of children being able to come on board through both long daycares and government preschools, primarily long daycare, in 2026. And that's in addition to that 700 children that we mentioned before who are eligible for the 15 hours from this year. And I'm happy to expand on any aspect of the rollout and the logic of that rollout.
Yes, I have 31 potential questions, so we'll see how we go. A couple of them have been answered already. In relation to the answer that was just given, Minister, can I clarify the long daycare centres that Ms Little was talking about that you'll be seeking to be brought on board from 2026? Are they in those same rural and regional areas where the 40 government preschools are to be opening up their capacity, or is that potential thousands of students in 2026 also including long daycare centres in the metropolitan area?
Yes. I'll pass over to Kim Little to provide an answer to that question.
Through you, Minister. Yes, so the difference in the rollout approach that I was describing earlier is while there's a geographic rollout approach for what one might call sessional preschools, so whether they're run by government or run by the small number that are run by non-government providers, for the long daycare sector, the proposal is one of readiness. So when that long daycare sector has the staff in place and is prepared to meet the other requirements which we're going to have, which we're working closely with the sector on across the second half of this year, they'll be able to turn on regardless of whether they're in metro, in a regional centre or in any other part of the state. And that gives us the ability to harness that latent capacity within the long daycare sector as quickly as possible and have the reform move as fast as it can within those services. And the reason why there's that logic is obviously it's the case that long daycare services already have rooms full of 3-year-olds. The Royal Commission found that 64% of 3-year-olds in South Australia attend a long daycare service for an average of almost 30 hours a week. And so they already have the infrastructure, they already have the rooms full of 3-year-olds, they already have the educator staff, so the Cert 3 and diploma qualified staff, and in at least some cases, as found by the Royal Commission, they also have teacher capacity available to be able to stand up a preschool program quite quickly. So we'll be looking to work with each of the long day cares who are in that position, regardless of where they are in the state, in order to support them to begin the offer as soon as possible in the rollout.
I will foreshadow that I will have some questions that go directly to those points about what then is going to be the nature of the difference between what those 3-year-olds are currently receiving in their long day care centres and what will change for them under the new model. But my other question directly to your earlier answer was that there are 40 government preschools in rural or regional areas to be potentially offering 100 or 200 places. Have those sites been chosen yet? You come up with 40 because you know that there are 40 centres that would be capable of taking the 3-year-olds in 2026. You know that now, or is it 40 is an indicative number that you're now going to go and look for the sites that might be ready to go?
Okay, I'll pass over to Kim.
Thank you, Minister. Thank you for the question. We have announced the specific locations for the geographic rollout. That's published on the website of the Office of Early Childhood Development, down to what's called Statistical Area 2, so down to quite a fine level of detail. And there are also maps that people can go onto and determine whether they're living within an area and where it's intended to come on board. I will emphasise that, of course, that's in addition to the statewide long day care rollout, so it's a mix of those two coming together. But yes, that information about the locations that are going to be lighting up in each of the years of the rollout has been published along with maps.
Thank you. The Royal Commission identified a fairly significant staff shortfall. We'll get to the requirements for what 3-year-old preschool will require, but obviously there's been a little bit of time passed since the Royal Commission reported. Do you have current data for what our existing staff shortages are in both the public preschool system for teachers and other qualifications, and then the broader sector for those teachers and other qualifications too? I'm just talking about under the current expectations for the early years, not 2026, but now.
I can advise in terms of government preschool, member for Morialta, current staffing waivers. I understand that our preschools are fully staffed, so we've got no vacancies, which is really good news. In terms of staffing waivers, 12 teachers and 8 early childhood workers, they're all in country locations. And I might pass over to Kim to give an answer to the other part of your question.
You, Minister. So the latest data that's available comes to us through data that's collected by the Education Standards Board, as you would know, which is also published periodically. That latest data shows that amongst long day care services, approximately a quarter of long day care services in South Australia have a staffing waiver of some form. That could be a staffing waiver in relation to teachers, and we understand that in general they are teacher staffing waivers, or it could be a staffing waiver in relation to another member of staff, including diploma qualified or Cert 3 qualified staff. It's something that we're very focused on in terms of rolling out the reforms. Historically, neither state governments nor Commonwealth governments have been especially focused on supporting staffing or indeed quality in long day care services. And we see the advent of 3-year-old preschool and the new relationships we're going to have into long day cares across the state, our investment in the workforce strategy, our investment in quality, which will include those long day services, as a real opportunity to directly engage with and help to tackle these issues within services. I'd also note that the Commonwealth Government commitment made in the most recent budget, which was to support new industrial arrangements through the multi-employer bargain that's being done through Fair Work nationally for the long day care sector, and support higher wages and better conditions within long day care sectors, will also be a contribution to that. But we see these reforms as a way in to work with long day care sectors on lifting both the volume and quality of their staffing, while noting that broader issues about childcare workforce availability are of course ones the Commonwealth is very involved in as well.
Thank you for that. Can I just clarify the number? Was that 12 teachers and 8 early childhood workers currently with waivers across the whole of South Australia? Is that the number that was quoted?
For public preschools.
Oh, for public preschools. So, yes, and then that your
data
answer
I
then
gave
saying that there were
was roughly
quite a
a
lot in
quarter.
long day care.
Yeah, roughly a quarter of long day cares have a staffing waiver of some form, according to the latest ESB data.
My recollection is that there are probably 1,000 services in South Australia. Is that in the order of what we're talking about? Several hundred, or?
There aren't 1,000 long day care services.
So
There
1,000
are-
includes
there are-
OSH
there-
and other things, I expect.
Yes, indeed. And I'm not commenting on those because that's not directly relevant to the 3-year-old
Yeah, okay.
rollout, if that makes sense.
So, but we're potentially talking 100 or more, but that data is on the ESB website. Is that what you're telling me?
The Royal Commission found that there are approximately 120 additional staff needed in the long day care sector relative to the national law requirements, so that goes to the staffing waivers. The ESB doubtless would have data in relation to other service types. I don't have that available on me.
Thank you. Anecdotally, and this is directly on the same line, but anecdotally there's often discussions I've heard from non-government long daycare services about the difficulty for them in retaining staff. When public preschools advertise positions, sometimes the pay is higher, sometimes the conditions are better, and there's also obviously other benefits of being in the public service for those teachers who might one day want to work in a school. So certainly for some centres, and it's different from centre to centre, some centres struggle to retain staff on the basis of the demands of the public preschool service. Can I ask, from the public preschools point of view, what are staff retention rates in government preschools? How many retire or move out of preschools into schools or other service each year?
We'll take that on notice, Member for Morialta.
Thank you. And in the same vein then, I would ask also how many public preschool teachers and other qualified staff are recruited each year as well as attrited.
Yes, we'll take that on notice too.
For 5, page 19. Can the Minister provide the committee with information about how the budget will support the development of early childhood workforce?
Thank you, Member for Waite, for your question. And we know that significant growth in the early childhood education and care workforce is required to deliver on the election commitment we have made for universal 3-year-old preschool. And Kim Little has just given some answers in response to questions from the member for Morialta around the magnitude of that workforce growth that we will need. About $97 million is being invested to recruit, retain and return teachers and educators to the ECEC workforce. We obviously need to build the local workforce, which will be the biggest component of that, as well as attract other workers to South Australia from elsewhere. Of course, and this goes to the last question the member for Morialta asked about turnover. We need to do more, I think, in terms of retaining the existing workforce as well. Last week, Kim and I released the workforce strategy, which is a very clear, I think, document, of course, for the public, but sort of specifically for those that we are seeking to work with and partner with to deliver on this election commitment around how we are planning on doing that. Of course, part of that will be attracting people to South Australia in terms of scholarships that we are going to be offering, and they'll be particularly important in hard-to-staff locations, and we have a number of those in South Australia. We want to better support students during their studies and their transition to employment. That speaks to improving completion rates and lowering attrition rates, which are disproportionately higher in all these areas in the first few years of teaching. In terms of retention, better career support, mentoring for provisionally registered teachers, professional development for existing staff. There's an Innovation and Local Action Fund, and this has been a key priority, I think, of Kim's, which we have spoken about at length. The capacity for individual local communities to apply for funding to address particular needs in their community to retain the workforce. That is going to be crucial to delivering this, particularly in a state like South Australia, where we are a state with a large capital city and a lot of small regional, remote and rural locations around the state, which can make a reform like this challenging. But having that Innovation and Local Action Fund to make recommendations around what needs to be done in that area, taking into account that the things that might need to be done in that specific location may well be different to what needs to be done elsewhere, I think is going to be really vital in terms of us being nimble and having the flexibility we need to find solutions, particularly in hard-to-staff areas, which, as I said, by the very nature of our geography and the way South Australia is made up, we have a lot of those spaces. There is also a dedicated Aboriginal workforce strategy, and we know that attracting and retaining Aboriginal people to the early child education and care workforce is difficult as well, but important for a lot of reasons, including we want to make sure that Aboriginal children access 3-year-old preschool, and having good representation amongst our staff in delivering that will, of course, really help in terms of having that level of trust from Aboriginal families to use those services in their areas, and that's why there is a carve-out there for a specific Aboriginal workforce strategy. A multidisciplinary workforce too. We recognise that the Royal Commission recommendations require additional allied health workforce as well. And that goes to recommendation 1, I think, around reducing the level of developmental vulnerability amongst 5-year-olds and seeking to get that figure down from its current level of 23.8. And the delivery of a second year of preschool will help with that, but it's not just about that. And the Honourable Julia Gillard was very clear that we'll need to wrap other supports around both 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds if we are to succeed in making good on our commitment to reduce that level of developmental vulnerability. And that's a summary, I think, of the things that we announced last week. I think that it is safe for me to say it was received well by the room, who had been, patiently awaiting the release of this document. But I want to thank Kim and her team for the immense amount of work that went into preparing this, because it will be an important document in terms of the delivery of this election commitment.
Member for Moriarty.
Thank you. We're all on the same budget line. Can I ask, I'll go back to that other issue we were talking about before, the 3-year-olds who are in long daycare at the moment. Commissioner Gillard recommended that they receive their new entitlement of 3-year-old preschool within their current setting, albeit under the same payment arrangements as they would be if they were just standard long daycare as they receive at the moment, as in parent fees subsidised by the Commonwealth. Can I ask then, given the steps forward that we've seen in recent decades and the National Quality Framework being rolled out for long daycare services anyway, the provision of qualified staff and teachers in that setting, a fairly simple, broad question: what is going to be the effective difference for a 3-year-old in a quality long daycare service as they are at the moment, and a 3-year-old receiving a 3-year-old preschool type program in the same long daycare service in 2026? What is the practical difference? What is the uplift that will be required for the service to be seen as one of the ones that gets described as a preschool in 2026?
That's a good question, Member for Morialta, and a lot of work has been done on this, and I'm happy to pass over to Kim to take you through what those steps are going to be for services that are partnering with us to make sure they meet requirements, so that we have consistency, regardless of whether, or regardless of where, I should say, 3-year-olds are accessing their dose of preschool.
Through you, Minister. Thank you for the question. So probably 3 key points to make. The first one is, while through the Royal Commission it was identified that there were some long day cares across South Australia that would already have teacher and educator capacity in place, which would allow them to help stand up a 3-year-old preschool program, the majority of services didn't. The majority of children in long day care services in South Australia right now don't receive a teacher-led 3-year-old program. And so what that means is, whether or not you receive a teacher-led program in your room, either for all the days you attend or some of the days you attend, is really a matter of luck. And one of the things that this reform is intent on doing is making it the case that it's not a matter of luck, whether or not you as a child are able to receive a high-quality teacher-led program. So that's the first clarificatory point to make about what's currently available within the long daycare sector. Absolutely, we want to use latent capacity that already exists within that sector, but by and large, long daycares, the majority of them, are not running 3 or 4 or 5 days a week worth of a teacher-led 3-year-old program. For the ones that are, we'll look to partner with them quickly and to move, but there's still a lot of heavy lifting to be done in relation to the majority of the sector, including those who currently have staffing waivers in place. I think the second point to make is, even if you're a child in a service right now that has some form of teacher engagement in your 3-year-old room, whether some of the time or all of the time there's a teacher actually in the room helping to deliver, what you don't have access to is all the things that the Royal Commission recommended as part of its broader definition of preschool in South Australia. And this is one of the genuinely innovative elements of what's been recommended by the Royal Commission and adopted by government. What the Royal Commission says is, it's not purely that there's a teacher available to the room, although that's, don't get me wrong, a good thing in and of itself. It's that that teacher is well supported. It's that that teacher has higher than the award levels of time off the floor to do planning. It's that they have both capacity and support for them to do professional development. It's that that service is able to engage with allied health and family support services. It's that there's outreach available to that service to support families who might not otherwise be served to come in and attend regularly. It's that that service is better connected to other players within their local area as part of a local system, facilitated by the local teams that the Royal Commission has recommended be stood up, but also has opportunities to run professional networks, to work with other teachers and educators and other sorts of professionals in their area. At the moment, with the exception of the government preschool system, by and large, our long day care services in South Australia are quite atomised. There are some that belong to larger providers like Good Start, for example, who might have the benefit of the sorts of things that I'm talking about, at least in part. But much of the sector does not have the benefit of funding streams, capacity building, or the sorts of support that I'm flagging that would help them to stand up a high quality preschool program, defined as Ms Gillard does, which is not just teaching and learning, it's also connections into other service systems as well, and supports for children and family who need that extra support. So I think if you're a family right now who's going to a standard long day care in South Australia, one, you're most likely not to be receiving a teacher-led program. But even if you're a family who's going to a service that does have enough teacher capacity to have the teacher in the room at least some of the time during the course of the week, that service doesn't have the funding streams and doesn't have the support available to stand up this much richer, high-quality conception of what preschool should look like for 3-year-olds in long daycare services. So there's a leap. You can think of preschool, if you like, in long day care as a quality intervention. It's designed to help support long day care services, along with our wonderful government services and non-government services as well. It's designed to help support long day cares to be able to do their best possible job in relation to those children, and that is a leap from where we are now.
Can I ask directly on the same line then, and directly following? The two differences identified were teacher-led program in the 3-year-old room, say, and then those broader things recommended by the Royal Commission. I won't go through them, people can check the Hansard. Would it be correct to characterise that when we talk then about a teacher-led program, I'm trying to think, draw things, strip it right back to how you would assess, is this a long daycare centre with an approved 3-year-old preschool program, or is it just a quality long daycare centre somewhere along the journey towards that, but not yet at the mark? Is it going to be the government's expectation in 2026 that any of these first centres approved to be of the model would have a teacher delivering that 15 hours of direct relationship with the child, or given all of the other things that have been described, is a teacher-led program just one where the teacher is present for a majority of the time and giving some direction to what the program is then being delivered by other qualified staff? I'm not making any value judgment here, I'm just trying to clarify at what point does a preschool program mark get the tick in that long daycare service, as opposed to there being a teacher in the centre and meeting the requirements currently under the National Quality Framework.
Thank you, Member for Morialta. I am informed that there needs to be a teacher leading the 15 hours at all times.
And when you say leading, it's effectively in the room, you know, basically. Okay.
Yes.
And that is my understanding. I just wanted to make sure that was the case. And then the second aspect, those broader things that the Royal Commission demanded, is it, teacher being well supported, time off to do planning, allied health and outreach engagement being available, are they things that the government is going to provide for the long day care services, or are they engagements and uplifts that the service has to find within itself before it will be eligible to participate in this program and get the tick?
pass over to Kim Little to provide an answer. Member for Morialton.
Through you, Minister. Thank you for the question again. So it depends in part on what aspect of the support we're talking about. So if we're thinking about additional support to services and providers in order to support the professional development of their staff in service, what the Royal Commission recommends is that funding to help support that, to help, defray the cost of that, be built into the funding model. So at the moment, there's obviously no funding available for long day care services to do 3-year-old. And the Royal Commission funding model builds up a number of elements. It builds up funding for teaching and learning. The Royal Commission recommends $2,300 be available for teaching and learning, with some additional loadings around layered support. So that's the allied health and connection to family services, loadings for outreach and so on. I won't go through the full funding formula. We would definitely use up the next half hour, but happy to answer any specific questions. So in terms of funding provided to the service, the Royal Commission recommends that teachers be able to have some additional planning time each week and have 2 days per year off the floor to be able to go to professional development. That funding would flow to the service, obviously, for them to be able to support those costs. In terms of broader professional learning opportunities, the part of the announcement of the workforce strategy includes a full suite of quality initiatives which will be available free of charge out into the sector. So that will involve a calendar of professional development that will be available, whether in person or through webinars and so on. It'll involve biennial conferences for the sector as a whole. It'll involve specific coaching and mentoring programs, including for early career teachers. And those are things that we would stand up and we would provide to the sector. I will say that we will, of course, do that in very close collaboration with the sector, because we want to ensure that the things that we're providing in order to support their staff to thrive and do their best possible work are fit for purpose. So we'll work very closely with the sector on those. In terms of your question about allied health and connection to family support services and so on, what the Royal Commission calls layered supports, we're going to do a consultation across the course of the second half of this year about what the appropriate mix is there, and we're really keen to hear from the sector. What's the appropriate mix of, if you like, funding provided directly to the sector with a set of guidelines about how that money can appropriately be used to achieve its objectives, versus any work we might do to centrally procure or commission, if you like, a service in order to use an economy of scale. And we're very, very interested in hearing from the sector about what they believe the appropriate balance and mix of those things are. Sometimes, and I was fortunate enough to be in the gallery when the Minister was answering a question about devices in schools, sometimes using the purchasing power of the state in order to provide a service rather than provide cash for providers to then go get that service themselves is the most efficient and effective way of getting done. And sometimes giving the money directly to services and to providers so they can work within their local ecosystem and purchase and pull down services within funding guidelines is the right approach. I suspect we'll end up with a mix of the two, but we're really keen to design that very closely with the sector over coming months. I hope that's an informative answer.
It is, thank you. What does the 3-year-old, in what way will the 3-year-old preschool program differ from the current program that a 4-year-old will get? I suspect this is the second dot point on page 39, the 19, the 30 million to align support offered through 4-year-old preschool with 3-year-old preschool. That might be it. It might be something else, but my understanding is that Aboriginal children and children under guardianship who are currently accessing preschool services are basically just accessing the same preschool services as the 4-year-olds, which is beneficial for those students because it's better than the alternative in many cases. It's an opportunity for them to engage, to socialise and to have that development. But the purpose of a universal 3-year-old program, the Royal Commission, I think, is only fully realised if you actually have a program that's designed and purpose-built for 3-year-olds. So where are we up to in identifying what that looks like, especially given the extra developmental needs that 3-year-olds generally have that 4-year-olds don't. Nappy changes just coming to mind immediately.
Yes, thank you, Member from Morialta. You've touched upon some good points there, and I'll pass over to Kim to give some more detail, but I'd say layered supports is one that I would point to straight away as being a difference. And it's something that obviously Kim has already spoken about in a fair bit of detail around things that we are going to need to do. And then at the end of your question, you touched upon, for instance, and it was a good example, nappy change facilities, which I think, is obviously something we are very cognizant of as well, in terms of the way that our 4-year-old preschools are currently set up or not set up to accommodate and care and teach 3-year-olds who, of course, by virtue of their stage of development will need to have that. And I think, if I recall correctly, we've discussed potentially spaces for kids to nap and things like that as well, which might not always be present in the 4-year-old preschool context. But I'll pass over to Kim to give some more detail.
Through you, Minister. Two-part answer to your question. The first is complete agreement with the point that preschool for 3-year-olds needs to be developmentally appropriate for 3-year-olds. And one of the things that we're going to be very interested in doing in working with the sector, both long day cares but also sessional preschools, predominantly run by the government sector, is to support the professional learning and professional development for staff who may not have had extensive experience beyond perhaps a small number of children who are currently eligible under the targeted initiatives, may not have had extensive experience working with 3-year-olds. Of course, that's not true in the long day care sector. The long day care sector does have extensive experience working with 3-year-olds, albeit not with the level of support for programming that's proposed to be offered through these reforms, as I've addressed in a previous answer. So we will be doing that work obviously under the banner of the Early Years Learning Framework, which is the national learning framework for young children in Australia and consistent with that learning framework. But I would anticipate, exactly as has been done in other jurisdictions that have introduced 3-year-old, that we will be working closely with the department, building on work they've already done in this space, to build out resources and guides and professional development for staff about age-appropriate, obviously play-based, 3-year-old preschool that's developmentally appropriate for that age group. So absolutely, that's something we will be focused on doing through the reform, and that is something that has been a focus in other places that have introduced 3-year-old as well. In many cases, we can build on, you mentioned before that there are, of course, very high quality long day care services in South Australia. I'll call one out in particular, not to say that it's the only one of its kind, but for example, the work that Gowrie does in its service, which is a long day service, which obviously includes 3-year-olds, drawing on that local expertise, the expertise from our universities and our researchers and from the department itself, to ensure that we have that support for teachers and educators who may not have had significant experience previously in working with 3-year-olds, and to support the new entrants into the workforce as well, who are going to be taking on that program. I think the second part of your question related to the line about 4-year-olds, about the consequential impact on 4-year-olds. Just to unpack that, the current funding model for 4-year-olds in long day care in South Australia doesn't contain many of the elements that have been adopted for 3-year-old. So it doesn't contain, for example, that additional support for professional development and for professional planning. It doesn't contain the layered supports money, and neither for long day care nor for sessional preschools does it contain any outreach money. And so one of the things that the Royal Commission recommended was not only that government stand up and offer around 3-year-old with this new funding model and this more comprehensive definition of preschool, but to the extent there was a difference between that model and existing 4-year-old funding models, that they be normed so that we have essentially the same approach for both 3 and 4-year-olds. So what that would mean, to take an example from the government preschool space, is right now government preschools don't have access to money for outreach, even in CEFA 1 and 2 areas, to support families who might not otherwise engage or regularly engage to come into service. One of the recommendations of the Royal Commission is that that be available to the government system and to other aspects of the service system as well, working in those disadvantaged communities, not only for 3-year-old, but for 4-year-old as well, because it would be odd to put that program on and make it available for 3-year-olds, but suddenly have it not available for 4-year-olds. So it's a consequential impact from the 3-year-old reforms.
All right, so and is that the $30 million in the second dot point to align
Yep.
those two together?
Correct.
Thank you.
Interrupt for a second. Member for Flora, you have a procedural motion, please.
Sir, I'm cognizant of the fact that because of the additional time, I move that the sitting of the committee extend beyond 1 p.m.
Is that seconded?
Yes, sir.
I'll put that. All those in favour say aye. Those against say no. It's declare it carried. Member for Moriarty.
Thank you, sir. My question goes to an issue that was, I think, very present in the recommendations of the Royal Commission, but the government in its response may or may not have worked out how to address it or not. My concern is that the Royal Commission assumed that if a child was getting their dose of, if the child was in a long daycare service, they would get their dose of 3-year-old preschool in a long daycare service, in the same long daycare service, presumably, where possible. At the moment, such a child is in that long daycare service at 3 years old, but many will go to a public preschool when they're 4, potentially supplementing, continuing in their long daycare service as well. It's attractive to families. They might see a quality difference. Many of them, I suspect, appreciate the fact that there are no fees other than the term-by-term fees of a couple of $100 as opposed to whatever they're paying per day. So my question is, what are going to be the rules for a family whose 3-year-old is at long daycare, may have been there for years, but had wanted to go to a public preschool when they're 4? Are they still going to be able to? And if that's the assumed case, if there is going to be room for those children in the long daycare setting to go to a public preschool at 4, then are we going to, do they lose the benefit of having a 2-year program, given that they'll get 1 year of a program, a preschool program in one setting and the second year in a different setting?
Thank you, Member for Morialta. I'll answer the first question by saying that the entitlement to attend government 4-year-old preschool will remain. In terms of the last question, I think that you asked about if, for example, and you can correct me if I've got this wrong, a 3-year-old is receiving their dose in a long daycare setting, but receiving their 4-year-old dose in a government preschool, do we lose the benefit of having 2 years of preschool? I would say we don't, because of all the work that in some way Kim has already sought to explain around getting consistency around the provision of 3-year-old preschool in long daycare settings compared to government settings, and that would include consistency as best you can, I guess, between a dose of three-year-old preschool in a long day care and a dose of four-year-old preschool in a government. So we're confident that if long day care providers meet the requirements that we're going to put in place before they can partner with us, we will get that consistency.
Thank you. My next number of questions go to the challenge of attracting workforce. The Minister and the Chief Executive. Congratulations, I should say. The Minister and the Chief Executive before talked about the professional development for staff in the public preschool service to enable them to be more familiar with how three-year-olds are operating and what was developmentally appropriate for them, how they can be best supported. Has the Minister or the Department heard from the workforce any concerns in relation to, well, let me rephrase it. Has the Minister been overwhelmed with enthusiasm from current preschool directors and staff who are seeking opportunities to train to do three-year-olds? And conversely, has the Minister had concerns from staff who are satisfied with their current arrangements?
Thanks, Member for Morialta. Do my best to answer your question, given it is anecdotal in nature, but nonetheless, I think a fair question. I would say I've been met with a lot of positivity. I could certainly say that hand on heart in terms of the reaction from not just the government's existing four-year-old preschool workforce, but also private long day care providers who might be contemplating partnering with us, and that is a good thing, because you can understand there being a bit of a level of apprehension, and I am reminded by those who have been around longer than me around the apprehension that existed when four-year-old preschool was first introduced. So it's not surprising that there are some here, but I guess what gives me the most confidence is that the value of three-year-old preschool has never in any interaction that I've had with our staff been questioned in terms of its importance, its power in terms of better preparing kids for their first day of reception when they sit down, lowering levels of developmental vulnerability. Now, some of the concerns that are relayed to me, and you've already touched upon one of them in one of your questions, is around facilities in four-year-old preschools not always being fit for purpose to accommodate three-year-olds. That is certainly something which is relayed to me, and both I and Kim always seek to reassure people when that happens that we understand that. A lot of work is going into both modelling what work, infrastructure or otherwise, that might need to occur in which to make sure they can accommodate three-year-olds, and that we are funding this properly to ensure we can do all the things that we need to. But I think, certainly, I think a lot of the staff in four-year-old preschools are seeing this as an opportunity. If I was to be perfectly frank, the other consideration I think which weighs on people's mind is that we are having children who were born during COVID sort of coming through the system now, and they are showing higher levels of dysregulation, Sometimes I think lower levels of continence and things like that, because of the nature of the time that they were born and not having the same access to the kind of socialisation and all those kind of things. So that will be something we'll have to keep a very close watch on. But I'd say overall I've been buoyed by the response from the sector in understanding that although this will have challenges and have parts, including workforce, that are going to be hard, it is actually just something that we do need to do.
Given the challenges that we've already spoken about today and those that we're hopefully going to have a few minutes now to come to, that were identified by the Royal Commission, 800 extra teachers, 1,000 extra, or nearly 1,000 extra other staff with other qualifications being required, and there being some vacancies at the moment. 120 waivers, I think, was described by the Royal Commission at the moment, and the Minister said that there were 20 waivers in place for public preschools at the moment. Is a long daycare centre that's offering a preschool type program able to provide that program if the teacher in the room is somebody who's actually got a special authority to teach or is there under a waiver? At what point will the centre not be described as a 3-year-old preschool type program if they are unable to have a qualified teacher in the room?
The next question will be from the member for you.
Thank you, Chair. I'll pass over to Kim Little to provide an answer to the member for Morialta on this one.
Through you, Minister. So in response to the question about teacher-led programs, the one thing I'd say first about the data that comes out of the Royal Commission, and in particular the issue of the fact that there are already a number of long daycare services who have staffing waivers in place, is that of course us working with them for them to be able to have a teacher in the service and have a preschool teacher in the service will resolve that issue in many cases. So the issues aren't necessarily additive. Sometimes the solution to one is the solution to the other. So I just flag that as part of the context for the answer. So obviously we're going to be working very closely with long day cares who have existing qualified staff in place, or who through the various measures that are being invested in through the workforce strategy are able to acquire those staff. As a general proposition, those staff will be fully qualified teachers within service. I do want to call out one thing though that we're very interested in consulting with the sector on over the course of the next few months. So one of the strategies that's going to be used through the workforce strategy is around upskilling. So as the member would know, currently in long day care services, the 3-year-old rooms would generally be led by a diploma qualified staff member. So that's someone who's received their diploma already and in many cases has had years worth of experience leading that room. We've already been bombarded with interest from those diploma qualified educators who are interested in taking their next steps, supported by scholarships and supported by new pathways that are opening up in order to become teachers. So one of the things we're very interested in working through with the sector is we wouldn't want it to be the case that a service who had a diploma qualified room leader who was well advanced in their journey to upskill felt that they needed to dispense with that staff member and hire another teacher from somewhere else in order to be able to participate in the initiative. We do want to support, and it's not exclusively but mainly women, often people who are first in family to go to university, often people from called backgrounds, people who perhaps have been overlooked or underappreciated in the past, haven't had the opportunity to go to university. We do want to ensure that those diploma qualified room leaders are given as much opportunity as possible to become the teacher who leads that program within that service. And so we're interested in working with the sector about whether any flexibility is required there in terms of the funding stream for someone who may be mere months away from becoming a fully qualified teacher in the service. But that's something we'll consult very closely with the sector on. To the extent that there will be any funded 3-role programs that are being led by someone who's on their journey to become a teacher but isn't yet fully qualified, that would be entirely by exception. It would be governed by rules and guidelines, and we would work them through closely. It would also need to be transitional. It would also need to be for a time-limited period for us to be able to move to that person being a fully qualified teacher. But that's a very well recognised approach in early childhood. As you may know, under the national law that governs early childhood education and care, people are allowed to be working towards their qualification but still be counted within ratio. You're very familiar with all of this, of course. And so
I helped make that happen.
Oh, congratulations. That's wonderful. So we do have a particular context that allows transition and flexibility. We absolutely want to maintain standards. The goal of this is that every South Australian child by 2032 will be able to access a teacher-led program for at least 15 hours a week, and with up to 2,000 children accessing a 30-hour program per week. But we do need to be working closely with the sector and people within it already to give as many opportunities as possible for that to happen, and we'll be doing that work closely with them while safeguarding quality and ensuring arrangements are transitional. I hope that's useful.
Thank you. Member for Newland, we have time for a brief question and a brief
No problem.
answer.
Thank you, Chair. I refer to Budget Paper 4, Volume 1, page 176, and that relates to the Kindycare trials. And I do want to acknowledge and thank the Minister for the Kindycare trial at Fairview Park Kindergarten in my own electorate, which starts next week. Can the Minister please provide the committee with information about that trial in preschools commencing, of course, this year?
Thank you, Member for Newland, and it was great to announce this at Fairview Park Kindergarten with you, and it was great to see the response of not just that kindergarten but of the families who go there, and that the response to this Kindycare, or essentially out-of-hours care for preschool age kids, has been really overwhelming, which is good. It was a recommendation, I think number 43 of the Royal Commission report conducted by the Honourable Julia Gillard. It's important for a number of reasons, and given the short amount of time I have available to me, I might just touch upon the fact that I think it is really important that broadly as a system we do the things that are in our control to modernise our system to work for the families of today, which are families where if it's 2 parents or 1, they are all working, and the notion of being able to drop off at 9 o'clock and pick up at 3 or 3:15 every day is, not ideal and doesn't work for a lot of families. And we know that in the primary school context, we have many great out-of-school hours care services that are there in the morning to take care of kids, and there in the afternoon up until 6 o'clock to take care of kids, to fill in those gaps before and after the school bells ring. But we don't have the same thing in the preschool context, or at least in very few circumstances. My daughters go to a school where the OSH there has catered for the preschool kids, but it is the exception, and it is not an easy thing to do because, and I remember my eldest daughter saying this herself, that as a preschool kid she wasn't particularly comfortable with being at an OSH service with Year 6 or back then Year 7 students, which is another complexity that the OSH staff have to manage. So to have this trial run of Kindycare, where it is a standalone out-of-hours care service for the preschool kids, I think will not only mean kids are happy to be there, but parents feel a much higher level of confidence